Let me start with an uncomfortable question. What if the most dangerous phase in an empire's life isn't when people are afraid, but when leaders are calmly telling everyone that everything is finally under control? Because across history, the same pattern shows up again and again, right before systems break. Rome saw it. Britain lived it. The world in the 1930s ignored it. And here's the part that should make you uneasy. The United States has now crossed into that same phase. Not symbolically, not rhetorically, but structurally. And once societies enter this phase, history shows something disturbing. There has never been a gentle exit. In this video, I'm going to show you the final warning sign that empires always misread. Why it feels comforting at first, why even intelligent people defend it, and why, once it appears, the timeline is no longer in your control. Stay with me, because near the end, I'll show you the exact point where this shift began in the United States, and why the year 2026 keeps appearing in the data. Most people imagine collapse as chaos. Riots, empty shelves, currencies imploding overnight. That's not how it usually happens. Large systems don't die in explosions. They decay after long periods of stress, when leadership quietly switches from building the future to managing decline. This is the moment when survival optics replace honest repair. And here's the dangerous part. It always sounds responsible. It sounds calm. It sounds measured. It sounds like adults are back in charge. But in reality, this is the moment when a system stops being resilient and starts becoming brittle. In a healthy system, stress is absorbed through change. Bad businesses fail, and capital moves somewhere better. Overpriced assets fall, and money finds more productive uses. Interest rates rise, and borrowing naturally slows. These moments hurt, but they keep the system honest. They prevent small problems from turning into existential ones. Late-stage systems lose this ability, not because leaders are evil, but because fragility has built up so much that any real correction would trigger immediate crisis. So a choice is made, not to fix the system, but to freeze it, to hide stress, to smooth numbers, to control outcomes, to promise stability, not because things are strong, but because they are no longer strong enough to handle reality. This is not conspiracy. It's incentives. No institution survives admitting the structure is broken. So metrics get redefined, narratives get managed, and the hollowing continues quietly. Here is the signal. The final signal is when a system chooses financial control over economic truth. In plain language, when leaders decide markets can no longer be allowed to behave naturally because the results would be too dangerous. So instead, they suppress volatility. They guide interest rates. They reshape inflation definitions. They stabilize appearances. The system still looks alive, but has stopped healing. And once that happens, history shows the direction is already set. There is an important distinction here. Regulation tries to reduce abuse while preserving function. Suppression tries to prevent outcomes that reveal weakness. One works with reality. The other fights it. When that line is crossed, price discovery breaks. Risk can no longer be measured. Capital allocation becomes political, and the economy slowly transforms into a performance instead of a machine. Everything looks fine. Markets stay elevated. Employment looks stable. Growth prints positive numbers. But underneath, the feedback loops that create real wealth are dying. Rome didn't collapse during chaos. It collapsed when it tried to stabilize decline. For centuries, Rome grew through productivity, trade, and expansion. But eventually growth slowed. Costs rose. Debt exploded. Military spending became overwhelming. Rome had a choice. Accept pain or hide it. They chose to hide it. They slowly diluted the currency. They fixed prices. They punished hoarding. They controlled trade. Every step was sold as responsible leadership. Every step destroyed trust. And here is the critical part. For decades, Rome still looked functional. Armies marched. Roads worked. Taxes were collected. But the internal engine was broken. Farmers stopped producing surplus. Merchants stopped trusting money. Trade slowed. Regions isolated. The empire didn't die because resources vanished. It died because allocation stopped working. And when allocation becomes political instead of economic, decline accelerates. By the time the public understood, the system could no longer be fixed without immediate collapse. So leaders doubled down. More controls, more promises, more reassurance. Rome didn't fall because of invaders. Invaders arrived after it was already hollow. Now look at Britain. Britain didn't lose its empire when it lost wars. It lost it when it lost financial dominance and tried to preserve the illusion of control. After World War I, Britain was drowning in debt. Instead of adapting, IT tried to maintain prestige. It tied the pound back to gold at the wrong level. Not because it made economic sense, but because it symbolized power. The result? Exports became uncompetitive. Unemployment surged. Industry collapsed. But officials insisted on staying the course. It worked briefly. Markets calmed. Confidence returned. Then the system broke anyway. Britain eventually abandoned the policy, but the damage was permanent. Once again, stability optics were chosen over structural reality. Now let's talk about 1929. The crash didn't create the Great Depression. The response did. Instead of letting the system clear, leadership tried to freeze it. Bad debt stayed. Failed companies survived. Capital stayed trapped. What should have been a painful reset became a decade-long suffocation. Stability delayed recovery. And delay turned damage into disaster. And throughout it all, officials insisted things were improving. They believed it. That's the danger. Suppression feels responsible. It feels protective. It feels stabilizing. But it's not stability. It's postponement. Think of a forest where every small fire is suppressed. For years it looks perfect, until one day it burns everything. That is what suppression does to economies. Now we reach the uncomfortable part. The United States has entered this phase. Not rhetorically, not politically, structurally. Interest rates can no longer move freely. Why? Because debt servicing costs now control policy. Markets expect intervention. Every crisis meets liquidity. Every decline meets reassurance. Debt is not reduced. It is rolled forward. Inflation is not defeated. It is reframed. Narratives matter more than repair. This is the same stage Rome, Britain, and the 1930s all reached. Once here, the outcome is not avoidable. Only the timeline is. So why does 2026 keep showing up? Because multiple pressure curves intersect. Massive debt refinancing. Demographic spending cliffs. Currency confidence erosion. Geopolitical realignment. This is how systems break. Not randomly, but when stress synchronizes. This does not mean collapse happens overnight. It means options disappear. From that point on, every path leads to more fragility. History also shows something hopeful. The people who survive these transitions are not the loudest. They adapt early. They simplify. They reduce dependence on promises. They build flexibility. They stop chasing returns and start protecting resilience. This is not fear. This is pattern recognition. Every empire reaches the moment where truth becomes too expensive. So stability becomes the priority. That moment is already here. The only question is whether you recognize it early enough to stay ahead of it. If you found this analysis useful, consider subscribing. It really helps the channel.